Section 11 of From the Tower Window of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Candace Stellick, Dallas, Texas. From the Tower Window of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The Surprising Adventures of Don Quixote of La Mancha by Miguel de Cervantes. Edited by Francis Jenkins Alcott. There once lived in a certain village of La Mancha in Spain a gentleman who did apply himself wholly to the reading of old books of knighthood, and that with such gusts and delights as he neglected the exercise of hunting, yea, and the very administration of his household affairs. He plunged himself so deeply in his reading of these books that he spent in the lecture of them whole days and nights. And in the end, through his little sleep and much reading, he dried up his brains in such sort as he lost wholly his judgment. His fantasy was filled with those things that he read, of enchantments, quarrels, battles, challenges, wounds, wooings, loves, tempests, and other impossible follies. And these toys did so firmly possess his imagination that he dreamed inventions which he read were true, that he accounted no history in the world to be so certain and sincere as they were. Finally, his wit being wholly extinguished, he fell into one of the strangest conceits. To wit, it seemed unto him very needful, as well for his honour as for the benefit of mankind, that he himself should become a knight errant, and go throughout the world with his horse and armour, to seek adventure, and practise in person all that he had read was done by knights of yore, revenging of all kinds of injuries, and offering himself to dangers which, once happily achieved, might gain him eternal renown. He resolved to give himself a name worthy of so great a knight as himself, and in that thought he laboured 8 days, and in conclusion he called himself Don Quixote of La Mancha. Then he donned certain old armour that had belonged to his great grandfather, mounted his old lean horse Rozinante, and sallied forth into the world to seek adventure. With him rode as his squire one Sancho Panza, a labourer and an honest man, but one of very shallow wit. Don Quixote had said so much to him, had persuaded him so earnestly, and had made him so large promises, that the poor fellow determined to go away with the knight, and serve him as his squire. Don Quixote bade him to dispose himself willingly, for now and then such an adventure might present itself, that in as short space as one would take up a couple of straws, an island might be won, and Sancho be left as governor thereof. This same squire, Sancho Panza, did ride upon an ass. About the ass Don Quixote had stood a while pensive, calling to mind whether ever he had read that any knight errant carried his squire assishly mounted, but he could not remember any authority for it. Yet, notwithstanding, he had resolved that Sancho might bring his beast, intending to dismount the first discourteous knight they met from his horse, and give it to his squire. Don Quixote bethought himself that now he wanted nothing but a lady on whom he might bestow his service and affection. For a knight errant that is loveless resembles a tree that wants leaves and fruit, or a body without a soul. He bethought him of a damsel who dwelt in the next village to his manor, a young handsome wench, with whom he had been some time in love, although she never knew or took notice thereof. Her he chose as the lady of his thoughts, she being ignorant of it, and he called her Dulcinea of Toboso. Things thus being ordered, Don Quixote and his squire rode forth into the world, and had, with some good success, many ridiculous and rare adventures, as well as some that were dreadful and never imagined, all worthy to be recorded. All these adventures may be read in that strange book, the history of the valorous and witty knight errant Don Quixote of La Mancha. Herein will be related 3 of his adventures, to wit, the dreadful and never imagined adventure of the Windmills, how Don Quixote fought with 2 armies of sheep, and the high adventure and rich winning of the helmet of Membrino. The dreadful and never imagined adventure of the Windmills. The first day that Don Quixote and his squire Sancho Panza sailed forth to seek adventure, they traveled almost all day without encountering anything worthy the recital, which made Don Quixote fret for anger. For he desired to encounter presently some one upon whom he might make trial of his invincible strength. Riding thus, toward evening they discovered some 30 or 40 windmills that were in a field, and as soon as Don Quixote espied them he said to his squire, "Fortune doth address our affairs better than we ourselves could desire. For behold there, friend Sancho Panza, how there appear 30 or 40 monstrous giants, with whom I mean to fight, and deprive them of their lives, with whose spoils we will begin to be rich. For this is a good war, and a great service unto God, to take away so bad a seed from the face of the earth." "What giants?" quoth Sancho Panza. "Those that thou seest there," quoth his lord, "with the long arms; and some there are of that race whose arms are almost 2 leagues long." "I pray you understand," quoth Sancho Panza, "that those which appear there are no giants, but windmills; and that which seems in them to be arms are their sails, that swung about by the wind, do also make the mill go." "It seems well," quoth Don Quixote, "that thou art not yet acquainted with the matter of adventures. They are giants, and if thou beest afraid, go aside and pray, whilst I enter into cruel and unequal battle with them." And saying so, he spurred his horse Rozinante, without taking heed to his squire Sancho's cries, who called out that they were windmills that he did assault and no giants. But Don Quixote went so fully persuaded that they were giants that he neither heard his squire's outcries, nor did discern what the windmills really were, although he drew very near to them. Then he called out to them as loud as he could, "Fly not, ye cowards and vile creatures, for it is only one knight that assaults you." With this the wind increased, and the mill sails began to turn about, which Don Quixote espying said, "Although thou movest more arms than the giant Briareus, yet thou shalt stoop to me." And after saying this, desiring Lady Dulcinea to succor him, he covered himself well with his buckler, and set his lance on his rest. Then he spurred on Rozinante, and encountered with the first mill that was before him. As he struck his lance into the sail, the wind swung it about with such fury that it broke his lance into shivers, carrying him and his horse after it, and finally tumbling him a good way off from it on the field in very evil plight. Sancho Panza repaired presently to succor him, as fast as his ass could drive. And when he arrived he found his lord not able to stir, he had gotten such a crush with Rozinante. "By my beard," quoth Sancho, "did I not foretell unto you that you should look well what you did, for they were none other than windmills? Nor could any think otherwise unless he had also windmills in his brains." "Peace, Sancho," quoth Don Quixote, "for matters of war are more subject than any other thing to continual change; how much more, seeing that some magician, such is this enmity he bears towards me, hath transformed these giants into mills to deprive me of the glory of the victory. But yet, in fine, all his bad arts shall but little prevail against the goodness of my sword." "God grant it as he may," said Sancho Panza, and then he helped his master arise, and presently he mounted him on Rozinante, who was half shoulder pitched by the rough encounter. And thus discoursing upon the adventure they followed on the way, which guided towards a passage through the mountains. For there, as Don Quixote avouched, it was not possible but to find many adventures, because it was a thoroughfare much frequented. How Don Quixote fought with 2 armies of sheep. One day Don Quixote and his squire, while they rode, perceived a great and thick dust to arise in the way wherein they traveled. Turning to Sancho, Don Quixote said, "This is, Sancho, the day wherein shall be manifest the good which fortune hath reserved for me. This is the day wherein the force of mine arm must be shown as much as in any other whatsoever, and in it I will do such feats as shall forever remain recorded in the books of fame. Dost thou see, Sancho, the dust which ariseth there?
know that it is caused by a mighty army and sundry and innumerable nations which come marching there." "If that be so," quoth Sancho, "then must there be two armies, for on this other side is raised as great a dust." Don Quixote turned back to behold it, and seeing it was so indeed, he was marvellous glad, thinking that they were doubtless two armies which came to fight one with another in the midst of that spacious plain. The dust which he had seen, however, was raised by two great flocks of sheep that came through the same field by two different ways, and could not be discerned, by reason of the dust, until they were very near. Yet Don Quixote did affirm that they were two armies so earnestly that Sancho believed it, and demanded of him, "Sir, what then shall we two do?" "What shall we do?" quoth Don Quixote, "but assist the needful and weaker side? For thou shalt know, Sancho, that he who comes towards us is the great Emperor Alifanfaron, lord of the great island of Trapobana. The other, who marcheth at our back, is his enemy, the king of the Garamantes, Pentapolin of the naked arm, so called because he still earneth in battle with his right arm naked." "I pray you, good sir," quoth Sancho, "to tell me why these two princes hate one another so much." "They are enemies," replied Don Quixote, "because that this Alifanfaron is a furious pagan, and is enamored of Pentapolin's daughter, who is a very beautiful and gracious princess, and, moreover, a Christian. Her father refuseth to give her to the pagan king, until first he abandon Mahomet's false sect, and become a Christian knight." "By my beard," quoth Sancho, "Pentapolin hath reason, and I will help him all that I may." "By doing so," quoth Don Quixote, "thou performest thy duty. For it is not requisite that one be a knight to enter into such battles." "I do know that myself," quoth Sancho, "very well. But where shall we leave this ass in the meantime, that we may be sure to find him again after the conflict? For I think it is not the custom to enter into battle mounted on such a beast." "It is true," quoth Don Quixote, "that which thou mayest do is to leave him to his adventures, and care not whether he be lost or found, for we shall have so many horses after coming out of this battle victors, that very Rozinante himself is in danger to be changed to another. But be attentive, for I mean to describe unto thee the principal knights of both the armies, and to the end thou mayest the better see and note all things, let us retire ourselves there to that little hillock, from whence both armies may easily be described." They did so, and standing on top of a hill, from whence they might have seen both the flocks, Don Quixote, seeing in fancy that which he really did not see at all, began to say with a loud voice, "That knight which thou seest there with the yellow armor, who bears in his shield a lion crowned crouching at a damsel's feet, and the valorous Laurcalio, lord of the silver bridge. The other, limbed like a giant, that standeth at his right hand, is the undaunted Brandabarbary of Boliche, lord of the three Arabias, and comes armed with a serpent's skin, bearing for his shield, as is reported, one of the gates of the temple which Samson overthrew to be revenged on his enemies. But turn thine eyes to this other side, and thou shalt see first of all, and in the front of this other army, the ever victor and never vanquished Timonel of Carciona, prince of New Biscay, who comes armed with arms parted into blue, green, white, and yellow quarters, and bears in his shield, in a field of tawny, a cat of gold, with a letter that says Mayal, which is the beginning of his lady's name, which is, as the report runs, the peerless Mayalina, daughter of Duke Alfanaquin of Algarve." And thus Don Quixote proceeded forward, naming many knights of the one and the other squadron, even as he had imagined them. And he attributed to each knight his arms, his colors, and mottos, for he was suddenly borne away by the imagination of his wonderful distraction. Sancho Panza stood suspended at his master's speech, and spoke not a word, but only would now and then turn his head, to see whether he could mark those knights and giants which his lord had named, and by reason he could not discover any, he said, "Sir, I give to the devil any man, giant or knight, of all those you said did appear, at least I cannot discern them. Perhaps all is but enchantment, like that of the ghost of yesternight." "How sayest thou so?" quoth Don Quixote. "Dost not thou hear the horses neigh, the trumpets sound, and the noise of the drums?" "I hear nothing else," said Sancho, "but the great bleating of many sheep." And so it was, indeed, for by this time the two flocks did approach them very near. "The fear that thou conceivest, Sancho," quoth Don Quixote, "maketh thee that thou canst neither hear nor see aright; for one of the effects of fear is to trouble the senses, and make things appear otherwise than they are. And seeing thou fearest so much, retire thyself out of the way, for I alone am sufficient to give the victory to that army which I shall assist." And having ended his speech, he set spurs into Rozinante, and, setting his lance in the rest, he flung down from the hillock like a thunderbolt. Sancho cried to him as loud as he could, saying, "Return, good Sir Don Quixote, for I vow unto God that all those which you go to charge are but sheep and muttons. Return, I say. Alas that ever I was born! What madness is this? Look, for there is neither giant, nor knight, nor cats, nor arms, nor shields parted, nor whole, no pure azures, nor devilish. What is it you do? Wretch that I am!" For all this Don Quixote did not return, but rather rode, saying with a loud voice, "On, on, knights, all you that serve and march under the banners of the valorous Emperor Pentapolion of the Naked Arm. Follow me, all of you, and you shall see how easily I will revenge him on his enemy, Alifanfaron of Trapobana." And saying so, he entered into the midst of the flock of sheep, and began to lance them with such courage and fury as if he did in good earnest encounter his mortal enemies. The shepherds that came with the flock cried to him to leave off, but seeing their words took no effect, they unloosed their slings and began to salute his pate with stones as great as one's fist. But Don Quixote made no account of their stones, and did fling up and down among the sheep, saying, "Where art thou, proud Alifanfaron? Where art thou? Come to me, for I am but one knight alone, who desires to prove my force with thee man to man, and deprive thee of thy life in pain of the wrong thou dost to the valiant Pentapolin." And that instant a stone gave him such a blow on one of his sides as did bury two of his ribs in his body. He, beholding himself so ill dight, did presently believe that he was either slain or sorely wounded, and remembering himself of his oil pot, which he thought to contain some magic healing liquor, set it to his mouth to drink. But ere he could take as much as he thought requisite to cure his hurts, there cometh another stone, which struck him so full upon the hand and oil pot, as it broke into pieces, and carried away with it besides 3 or 4 of his cheek teeth, and did moreover bruise 2 of his fingers. Such was the first and the second blow, as the poor knight was constrained to fall down off his horse. And the shepherds arriving, did verily believe they had slain him, and therefore gathering their flocks together with all speed, and carrying away their dead muttons, which were more than 7, they went away without verifying the matter any further. Sancho remained all this while on the height, beholding his master's follies, pulling the hairs of his beard for very despair, and he cursed the hour and the moment wherein he first knew him. But seeing him overthrown to the earth, and the shepherds fled away, he came down to him, and found him in very bad plight. Yet had the knight not quite lost to use of his senses. "Sir Knight," quoth Sancho, "did I not bid you return, and tell you that you went not to invade an army of men, but a flock of sheep?" "That thief, the magician who is mine adversary," quoth Don Quixote, "can counterfeit and make men to seem such or vanish away, as he pleaseth. For, Sancho, thou oughtest to know that it is a very easy thing for men of that kind to make us seem what they please, and this magician that persecuteth me, envying the glory which he saw I was like to acquire in this battle, hath converted the enemy's squadrons into sheep. If thou wilt not believe me, Sancho, yet do one thing for my sake, that thou mayest remove thine error, and perceive the truth which I affirm. Ride ahead on thine ass, and follow the armies fair and softly aloof. And then thou shalt see that, as soon as they are parted any distance from hence, they will turn to their first form, and, leaving to be sheep, will become men, as right and straight as I painted to thee at first. But go not now, for I have need of thy help and assistance. I pray thee, give me thy hand, and feel how many cheek teeth, or others, I lack in this right side of the upper jaw." Sancho put in his finger, and whilst he felt him, demanded, "How many cheek teeth were you accustomed to have on this side?" "4," quoth he, "besides the hindermost, all of them very whole and sound." "See well what you say, sir," quoth Sancho. "I say 4," quoth Don Quixote, "if they were not 5, for I never in my life drew or lost any tooth." "Well then," quoth Sancho, "you have in this lower part but 2 teeth and a half, and in the upper neither a half nor any, for all there is as plain as the palm of my hand." "Unfortunate I!" quoth Don Quixote, hearing the sorrowful news that his squire told him, "for I had rather lose one of my arms, so it were not that of my sword; for, Sancho, thou must know that a mouth without cheek teeth is like a mill without a millstone, and a tooth is much more to be esteemed than a diamond. But we knights errant, which profess the rigorous laws of arms, are subject to all these disasters. Wherefore, give thee way, gentle friend, for I will follow thee what pace thou pleasest." Talking thus, they rode on their way where they thought they might find lodging. And about nightfall they perceived an inn near unto the highway wherein they travelled, which was as welcome a sight to Don Quixote as if he had seen a star that did guide him to the porch, if not to the palace of his redemption. Of the high adventure and rich winning of the helmet of Mambrino. The next morning, as Don Quixote and his squire were riding over the plains, it began to rain, and Sancho would fain have sought shelter in some nearby mill, but Don Quixote would in no wise come near one. But, turning his way on the right hand, he fell into a highway, as much beaten as that wherein they rode the day before. Within a while after, Don Quixote espied one a horseback that bore on his head something that glistered like gold. And scarce had he seen him, when he turned to Sancho and said, "Methinks, Sancho, that there's no proverb that is not true, for they are all sentences taken out of experience itself, which is the universal mother of sciences, and especially that proverb that says, 'Where one door is shut, another is opened.' I say this because, if fortune did shut yesterday the door that we searched, deceiving us in the adventure of the armies, it lays for us now wide open the door that may lead us to a better and more certain adventure, whereon, if I cannot make a good entry, the fall shall be mine. If I be not deceived, there comes one towards us that wears on his head the helmet of Mambrino, which I have made an oath to win." "See well what you say, sir, and better what you do," quoth Sancho, "for I would not wish that this were new shepherds to batter you." "The devil take thee for a man," replied Don Quixote. "What difference is there betwixt a helmet and shepherds?" "I know not," quoth Sancho, "but if I could speak as much now as I was wont, perhaps I would give you such reasons as you yourself should see how much you are deceived in that you speak." "How may I be deceived in that I say, scrupulous traitor?" demanded Don Quixote. "Tell me, seest thou not the knight which comes riding towards us on a dapple gray horse with a helmet of gold on his head?" "That which I see and find out to be so," answered Sancho, "is none other than a man on a gray ass like my own, and brings on his head something that shines." "Why, that is Mambrino's helmet," quoth Don Quixote. "Stand aside, and leave me alone with him." Thou shalt see how, without speech to cut off delays, I will conclude this adventure, and remain with the helmet as mine own, which I have so much desired. I will have care to stand off, but I turn again to say, that I pray God that it be a purchase of gold, and not flocks of sheep. I have already said unto thee not to make any more mention, no, not in thought, of sheep. For if thou dost, said Don Quixote, I vow, I say no more, that I will batter thy soul. Here Sancho, fearing lest his master would accomplish the vow which he had thrown out as round as a bowl, held his peace. This, therefore, is the truth of the history of the helmet, horse, and knight which Don Quixote saw. There were near this spot two villages, the one so little as it had neither shop nor barber, but the greater was furnished with one. The barber did therefore serve the little village when they had any occasion, as it now befell. For which reason he came bringing with him a brazen basin, and as he travelled, it by chance began to rain. So he clapped his basin on his head, to save his hat from staining, because it belike was a new one, and the basin, being clean scoured, glistered half a league off. He rode on a grey ass, as Sancho said, which Don Quixote mistook for a dapple grey steed, and the barber for a knight, and the basin for a helmet of gold. For Don Quixote did, with all his facility, apply everything which he saw to his raving chivalry and ill errant thoughts. And when he saw that the poor barber drew near, without settling himself to talk with him, he enrested his javelin low on the thigh, and ran with all the force Rozinante might, thinking to strike him through and through. And drawing near unto him, without stopping his horse, he cried, "Defend thyself, caitiff, or else render unto me willingly that which is my due by all reason." The barber, who without fearing or surmising any such thing saw that knight come suddenly upon him, had no other remedy to avoid the blow of the lance but to fall off his ass to the ground. And scarce had he touched the earth, when rising up again, as light as a deer, he ran away so swiftly through the plain as the wind could scarce overtake him, leaving his basin behind him on the ground. Don Quixote rested content, and commanded Sancho to take up the helmet, who lifting it said, "The basin is a good one." Then he gave it to his lord, who presently set it on his head, turning it about every way to see whether he could get the beaver, and seeing he could not find it, he said, "The pagan for whom this famous helmet was first forged had doubtlessly a very great head, and that which grieves me most is that this helmet lacks the beaver." When Sancho heard him call the basin a helmet, he could not contain his laughter, but presently remembering his master's anger, he checked himself in the midst. "Why dost thou laugh, Sancho?" demanded Don Quixote. "I laugh," said he, "to think on the great head the pagan owner of this helmet had, for all the world like a barber's basin." "Now, Sancho," quoth Don Quixote, "that this enchanted helmet did fall, by some strange accident, into some one's hands that knew not the worth thereof, who seeing it was of pure gold, without realizing what he did, melted the half to profit himself therewithal. Then he made of the other half this, which seems a barber's basin, as thou sayest. But be it what it list, to me who knows well what it is, its change makes no matter, for I will dress it in the first town where I shall find a smith, and in the meanwhile I will wear it as I may, for something is better than nothing, seeing it may defend me from the blow of a stone." "That's true," quoth Sancho, "if the stone be not thrown out of a sling, such as that of the battle of the two armies, when they blessed your worship's cheek teeth, and broke the bottle wherein you carried the most blessed healing potion." "I do not much care for the loss of it, Sancho," quoth Don Quixote, "for as thou knowest, I have the recipe in memory." "So have I likewise," quoth Sancho, bethinking him of the night he had been made ill by it. "But if I ever make it or taste it again in my life, I pray God that there may be my end. And more, I never mean to thrust myself into any occasion wherein I should have need of it, for I mean with all my five senses to keep myself from hurting any or being hurt. But leaving this apart, what shall we do with this dapple gray steed that looks so like a gray ass? This beast which that barber whom you overthrew left behind? For I think the man is minded not to come back for him again, since he laid feet on the dust and made haste. But, by my beard, the grey beast is a good one." "I am not accustomed," quoth Don Quixote, "to ransack and spoil those whom I overcome, nor is it the practice of chivalry to take their horses and let them go afoot, unless it befall the victor to lose in the conflict against his own, for in such a case it is lawful to take that of the vanquished as won in fair war. So, Sancho, leave that horse, or ass, or what else thou pleasest to call it. When his owner sees us departed, he will return for it." "Truly," said Sancho, "the laws of knighthood are strait, since they extend not themselves to license the exchange of one ass for another. And I would know whether they permit at least to exchange the one harness for another?" "In that I am not very sure," quoth Don Quixote; "and as a case of doubt, until I be better informed, I say that thou exchange them, if by chance thy need be extreme." "So extreme," quoth Sancho, "that if they were for mine own very person, I could not need them more." And presently, enabled by his master's license, he made the change, and set forth his beast with the harness of the barber's ass. This being done, they broke their fast, and drank from a nearby stream. And, having by their repast cut away all melancholy, they followed on the way which Rozinante pleased to lead them, who was the depository of his master's will, and also of the ass's, who followed him always wheresoever he went, in good amity and company. Thus they returned to the highway, wherein they travelled at random, seeking new adventures.
End of section 11. Recording by Candace Stellick, Dallas, Texas.